Good afternoon, everybody. I'm ABC7's Roz Varon. The auto show is my sent home for the next week and a half, and I am so happy to be back and moderating our panels for Facebook Live. Today, we are talking about electric vehicles, EVs, everything but the vehicle. So for those of you who are interested and you want to learn, this is the place to be. Let me introduce you to our panel. Right next to me is Mark Bielik. Mark's official title, General Manager and host of Drive Chicago Radio. Then we have Brian Normile, Road Test Editor from Cars.com. We also have Joe Kilcoyne and Albert Walters from Powering Chicago. So this is a great panel of folks to really give us everything we need to know about EVs. So the first thing I think I'm going to throw out there is many years as I've been covering this, I finally I stepped my toe in the water. I got a hybrid. Got a hybrid last year. But there is so much that we need to know and prepare for. So the first question is, if I'm thinking about getting an EV, what do I need to know? Who would like to start?
Yeah, I'll start there because one of the things that we did is we figured out that the attendees of the auto show were interested in EVs, and how can we help educate them? That's part of the mission of the auto show. It's not just cars on carpet, it's not just cool displays, it's not just fun vendors selling stuff, it's also education. And so that's why we brought in Powering Chicago, expert like Cars.com, and we put together this Chicago Drives Electric track. It's a 100,000 square foot EV track and education center. We've got Powering Chicago Cars is there, ComEd is there, talking about EVs, buying, owning, and what it's like to have an EV, and maybe to help people figure out whether it's right for them or not. And that's what it's all about, and that's why we've got experts like this.
Okay, so the follow-up question to that is, I've never had an EV, I've never had a hybrid, what do I need to do? What kind of lifestyle is right for what type of car?
Sure, I'll take that. So when consumers are looking at purchasing an EV, it changes a little bit or drastically from the internal combustion engine layout and the infrastructure. They know with an internal combustion engine, they're going to be able to fill up their gas tank pretty readily, just outside their home, in the neighborhood, on a road trip. So one of the questions that we get is, how are they going to keep their gas tank full, or their battery charged in this case? So what we have is a conversation that leads to electrical a lot of the times with them, because they are wondering if their home, if their business is set up as far as the infrastructure goes for how they will be charging that vehicle. So many times the conversation begins with, what does your current electrical infrastructure look like? What size service do you have to your home? This vehicle is going to likely be the largest single electrical load that you have at your home at that time if you purchase an electric vehicle. So being able to plan adequately for what that panel's capabilities are by seeking a qualified electrician, and you could do that through Powering Chicago. Our contractors all qualified to do that work and assess that panel for the consumer to make sure that, one, they have the capability to do that with their current setup. They might need upgrades, or that might really influence what kind of vehicle they choose. If you look towards something that might not need as drastic as size increase, maybe that would be the adequate vehicle then that they would like to purchase for themselves and their family.
Because if you were to ask me those questions, my answer would be, I don't know, and I don't know. So then I would need to get some type of electrician to come out and do an assessment of my garage. I have a detached garage, so I would have to find out what kind of power, what kind of current, because I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. You're 100% correct. You have to do what we call a site assessment. And you know Chicago's landscape. We have attached garages, detached garages. We have multiple dwelling units. So we cover the gamut. And the most important thing, just like Joe said, is to find out what your current electrical demand is, because you're going to add another demand to that system. And you did the right step by going to a hybrid, right? Because now that means that maybe you don't need the demand like someone with a full electric vehicle. However, you still need to know where you are, because there are code requirements, electrical code requirements, for installing this particular equipment and vehicle in your home.
How much does it generally cost to have an assessment done? People are going to want to know. It's like, oh, I'm getting an electrician, and this is going to be somebody official. This is a union. It's going to cost a lot of money. So just give me a ballpark range.
Yeah, I know, Brian, I know the cars.com. So, Brian's been quiet here, but cars.com actually buys all the vehicles that they evaluate, a lot of the vehicles they evaluate. And you guys did something really interesting about a year and a half ago now. So why don't you talk about that? I know that you guys can give some experts about the details, but we do know that the costs vary widely depending on what your service is, detached garage, attached, all that stuff. But tell everybody about what you guys did at cars.com.
Yeah, so I can't speak to just how much the assessment portion costs, but we had 6 editors install level 2 home charging at their residences, and the cost varied considerably. There's permits to consider, there's HOA to consider. One editor who didn't need to upgrade his electrical service at all was able to install the charger right by his electrical panel outside his home. Real easy, real simple. Still costs around $1,800. Another editor lived in Evanston and has, like you, a detached garage very far away from the house and needed a service upgrade. And with everything that entailed, that came out to almost $7,000. So as much as it's nice to give a ballpark figure, it really is going to depend on your living situation.
I'm talking about a ballpark figure for the assessment, not to actually put it in. I mean, just somebody to come out and look and say, okay, you're going to have to do this and this and this and this. They don't do that for free, but I understand what you're saying. To your point, there is a wide range of cost to install and upgrade the infrastructure in your garage to make sure that you can charge the vehicle. So, you were going to...
Something I would like to add to that is when a consumer is thinking about that, they don't necessarily need to install that infrastructure in their home, depending on their lifestyle, right? And depending on where they work, depending on how far it is that they're commuting. They very well might have an employer that is already set up so that they can charge their vehicle at work. That might be one of the benefits to working at that location. So it's not necessarily going to scare them away. There might be other options. Sometimes the assessments can be free. Sometimes they can cost several $100s depending on the contractor that's going to look at it. Some offer, same thing with renewable energy and photovoltaics on rooftops. Some offer a free assessment. Some will have a charge to it depending on the location and how they're looking at that consumer's approach.
So this brings up another point when you're saying, oh, if you can charge your vehicle at work, or you know that there's a charging station close to where I have to run my errands and go shopping, blah, blah, blah. When it gets really cold outside, like it did last month, and all these people with electric vehicles who didn't have charging stations in their home and thought that they were going to get up in the morning and start their car, and lo and behold, it didn't start. How do you answer that? And I'm not picking on one particular dealer. I'm not.
So
it's cold weather and batteries.
So one of the things that EV owners need to be aware of is that you're going to make a lifestyle choice. It's not simply replacing gasoline with electricity. You have to meet a certain set of criteria. And as vehicles get better, battery charging gets faster, and the batteries get more all-weather capable, that stuff will start to slide away. Just like if you remember back, in the 60s and 70s, cars had manual chokes you had to adjust and do all sorts of things. Same thing with an EV battery. Really, batteries are happiest in the temperatures we're happy. If it's too hot, they don't like it. If it's too cold, they don't like it. And they lose charge. They don't actually lose the electricity. They just lose the ability to give that electricity up. So what happened a few weeks ago in Chicago was very localized in the sense that there were a lot of people who didn't have charging at home, who couldn't keep their batteries topped off like a person with a home charger would do, plug it in every night, keep it at 80%, you're great every morning, you've got 200 miles range, you're good to go. These people were Uber drivers, and they were letting their batteries get very low, and they would go to public charging, EVs, fast chargers, and by the time they got there, their batteries were dangerously low. They couldn't precondition, and then they couldn't fast charge. So they were taking a long time to charge. By the time that happened, their batteries were knocked out, and now they couldn't do anything. And so, yeah, that was a very specific thing. That's a lifestyle thing with EV charging and ownership that you really need to understand. Did you guys have any issues at Cars, or?
We definitely saw some issues. We have a 2021 Tesla Model Y, and while we didn't experience the can't charge, fully dead, fully bricked car, it wasn't as efficient to charge, and unfortunately the editor who had it at the time didn't have home charging, so he couldn't keep it maintained at that level. It really just underscores the importance of that lifestyle change And if you're committing to an EV, you really do want to consider level 2 home charging. It's not necessarily going to be a thing depending on your needs, but it is really helpful, especially in extreme weather.
See, I would definitely do that because I am so proactive. I'm all about, I'm really bay about that. I want to make sure that that's not going to happen to me. But my point in bringing this up was just one more piece of the learning curve.
Absolutely.
When you're trying to figure out if it's right for you.
You're absolutely right, and you said the key, and Mark, you hit on it. It's about education, right? Understanding that this is a different system, and just like everything has a characteristic, so do batteries, right? We know that batteries typically don't perform well in heat. I don't know if you've ever set your phone in your car and walked away and then came back and it had the red temperature gauge and you can't use the phone. The same thing in the cold, right? They have a characteristics, and typically we have manufacturers that are prepared for this. Usually it's in the manual, like how to properly prepare the batteries. But again, we're so used to, we buy a car, we get in it, we fuel it, we go away, right? We drive and we do our thing. It's really about educating ourselves on the characteristics of the batteries, the vehicle, and understanding what this means for us as far as getting the best experience out of that electric vehicle.
I'm going to take a step back real quick and ask either Brian or Mark to talk about the different types of EVs, from hybrids to plug-ins to pure EV. And I think this can help people kind of decide what might be right for them. So, and you've test-driven a whole bunch, so if you want to take that one, go for it.
Sure. I actually drove a plug-in hybrid to the auto show today. Hybrids are sort of the base level. There's not actually any external charging to be done, but it improves fuel efficiency. I believe that's what you have, Roz.
I don't have a plug-in. I just have a regular
you just have
hybrid.
the regular series
Yeah,
hybrid.
yeah.
And then you get to plug-ins, which usually have larger battery packs. You can plug them into charge. There's actually an electric motor probably driving some of the wheels. You can drive it in all electric mode at higher speeds and for longer distances. And then you get to full electric, which is no gas at all, full battery, full charging. You got to figure that out. Rely on home charging or public charging.
So what is the benefit of having a plug-in versus full electric?
The benefit, I would say, of having a plug-in is that if your battery is depleted, you still have a gas engine and you still have a gas tank and you can still get where you're going. So, for example, I live in a place where I don't have home charging, so I don't always have this plug-in hybrid charged to its full battery capacity. But I still have the gas tank. So the engine runs, I can get where I'm going. It's pretty straightforward, but for commuting here, I was able to do that entirely under electric power and not use any gas. So I'm saving gas, and the charging cost relative to fueling is a bit more affordable.
Yeah, and I think another thing with plug-in hybrids, the electric demand, which you guys have talked about, is much lower. They usually charge at a lower speed, and you can plug them into the wall and pretty much fill the battery up overnight on your regular wall plug, assuming it's a 20 amp circuit. And so for a lot of people to dip their toe, you went hybrid, you could easily go, let's say you had a RAV4 hybrid now, you could go to a RAV4 plug-in, get 20 to 30 miles all electric range every day, every morning, and now you're visiting a gas station once a month or maybe even every other month because you're driving electric so much, right? And so that's an ideal, kind of baby step into this electrification if you're already in the hybrid world, because there are lots of hybrids out there already. I mean, most manufacturers are already selling hybrids. Prius hybrid, it turned like 30 years old this year.
Really?
And so they've been out there for a long time. You may not even know that you have a hybrid. For a lot of people, if they're a second owner, they might not even know they have a hybrid.
I want to follow up on that, because you've got this huge test track with all these different EVs on it, so people can not drive it, but ride in it and see how it feels. And there is a very specific difference in the feel of the car. Driving the car. You get used to it, but it's different. Who wants to talk about that?
I can start. It is very different, especially with a lot of all-electric vehicles. Especially, they have what's called one-pedal driving, which lets you slow down the car without actually depressing the brake pedal, which, if you're used to using 2 or even 3 pedals, can be very, very, very confusing.
The first time that happened to me, I'm like, what is this? Where's this setting? Who did this? Yeah.
But I have to say, even my first time was very confusing, but it got easier very quickly. You get very used to it.
Yeah, you do.
Some systems, I think, work a little bit better than others, are a little bit more gentle versus a little bit grabbier, and you can be a little less abrupt.
Jerky, yeah.
But overall, there are some very distinct differences, especially with acceleration and braking. But as you're going, it mostly feels like a car.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest change is there's no transmission really in most EVs. A few have a 2-speed transmission, but those are like a Porsche would have that. But so there's no shift shock. You just press the gas and it lurches forward in most cases. For most EVs are very quick, 0 to 60, and you have instant power. There's an instant connection with your foot and the speed you're driving versus in a gas engine, the engine has to kind of get up going and then the car starts to take off. So that's something that people will just, also the experience is very, for almost every single EV, the experience is very quiet. There's not an electric, there's not a gas motor, there's not an exhaust, there's not intake noise. And then another thing that I noticed in this cold weather, most EVs will heat up very, very quickly because they don't have to wait for the engine to get warm to heat the interior. They have heat pumps or they have electric heaters that immediately start pushing out some heat. And so by the time you're at the end of the block, you're like, oh, there's some hot air coming out. I'm pretty happy about that, which is interesting. And, you know, some EV manufacturers, take Mercedes-Benz, for example, they make their EV like a starship. I mean, there are controls and buttons and knobs and all sorts of modes you can go into. And then there's others like the Nissan Ariya where you can literally just push a button and drive it like a regular car. So there's different kind of experience levels in an EV as well.
It's such a learning curve. Before we get to more questions, we have a question on Facebook.
So we want to know if you order, what about ordering chargers online and installing them at home yourself? What do you guys recommend? So I think I know who should answer this one because we know you can find a lot of things online. Some things
Lick
you
your
probably
fingers
shouldn't do.
first when you're going to twist the wires, you know?
Very funny.
Absolutely. So that's a great question, and we've created an ebook that actually goes step by step on the things you should consider. But we are adamant about making sure you have a licensed, qualified electrician install anything in your home. And there's certain reasons for that. For instance, we were just going to touch on the fact that you had brought up where you could just plug this into a standard outlet that you have. Well, that's level 1 chargers, but there's the thing called the National Electric Code that basically protects people, property, and personnel from electric shock and hazards. And they state that in order to utilize this equipment that's going to be consuming energy for more than 3 hours, it has to be a dedicated circuit. That means no other outlets are on this circuit. So when individuals say, well, hey, listen, I can do it. I can do it myself, or I get my Uncle Joe Bob to come down and install this outlet. It's not just a dryer outlet, right? Again, the whole purpose for this is so that you can get the best experience out of that vehicle. So for instance, if you do tie this onto any other circuit, you can create certain issues like nuisance tripping, meaning when you charge a vehicle and then you go to use something else that's on that circuit, the breaker or the overcurrent device trips or fails, and now you're wondering, why is this happening? This vehicle is a piece of crap. Everything was working fine before I bought it. Now it's not. This is a piece of crap. But again, understanding really what's required of that on the electrical end will make sure that you have the best experience possible.
I want to follow up on that and talk about different types of homes. I mean, if you're in a townhome or a single-family home or an apartment complex or condos, I mean, there's a lot to consider here. So why don't you
Yeah,
talk about
absolutely.
that?
There are definitely considerations there as far as the strategy is going to go. And something that I would like to encourage people to do, especially if you're living in a multi-family household, if you're living in a facility that's an apartment or a condo. For example, I live in a condo that does not have deeded parking. So what I did was talk with the HOA on, hey, what is our strategy going forward? Prior to me living there, they were hooking up one vehicle at a time and slowly using up all the space that was available on any of the electrical panels. So I approached them and said, hey, there's a better way to do this so that way we can plan for the future and future expansion and talk to a contractor that can navigate through the process of selecting equipment that would do load sharing, that would do timed charging, that would do all the things that, so that way when people start plugging in their cars, they are ready to go in the morning and not expecting, not looking at their battery thinking it was going to be charged and wasn't, or the homeowners association and the building itself getting in a situation where they would have to incur costly upgrades to services because they ran out of room. So that's something that they can do strategy-wise by tackling that head-on before it becomes too late.
Did the HOA listen to you?
They did.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to add something to that too, and I know you guys know this, but electric cars are not toasters. They are not simply just drawing electricity and doing something. There's a brain inside the car that communicates with the power source and the charging device, and all of that has to be properly done in order for that charge to go forward. And in extreme cases, not only can you do starting a fire in your house or do damage or whatever if you didn't do it right, but you can damage the vehicle. And in a lot of cases, it's like, well, I'm going to save $500 by having my uncle do it, and then I'm going to destroy my $40,000 electric vehicle because of that.
Not
So
happening.
you really, these guys are absolutely 100% right. You want to have somebody who knows what they're doing and is qualified and is licensed and is insured and all of those things which you get along with an IBEW electrician.
Absolutely. And one more thing, too, that we really don't wrap our heads around is the fact that if, God forbid, if something should happen, most insurance companies are going to say, great, wonderful. Who installed this new piece of equipment? Were they licensed? Were they insured? And if Uncle Joe Bob did it, you know, again, you might want to have him move to a state where they don't extradite, right? But again, these are things that definitely need to be considered beforehand.
So we get this official equipment done by an official electrician. Do these charging stations, does this need maintenance? Does it need upkeep? How do we take care of it?
That is a great question as well. Not only is there operations and maintenance that is going to be required on these systems, but thinking about from the very beginning, not only that qualified installation, but looking at protecting that investment as well. If you think about it, you have a very high capability system, especially if you're starting to add energy storage to the garage as well, that you would want to be able to protect that system, right? More than the tennis ball hanging from the rafter in the garage to stop the vehicle. You'd want it located in an area where you're not going to cause damage to it. So that's one big thing for sure. And now you think about it, the systems have a cord set to them. So at home, obviously, we're going to look at it as, hey, we hang that back up, we keep it off the ground, we don't run it over, right? We maintain it properly so we have the longevity of the system. When it gets into the public charging situations, the owner of the building, the landlord, anyone in that realm would want to consider, hey, we got to protect these systems as well to avoid the liability of a damaged system being out there. So having someone inspect it periodically is going to be very worthwhile. Probably having an electrical contractor look at that yearly, or
I was going to say, how often should they do
but
that
really
inspection?
doing the spot checks, walking by, the folks getting the grocery carts and things like that. If there's something damaged on there, if the cord looks like it's been crushed or hanging out, have them report that to make sure that that gets taken care of in a timely fashion.
So what if we're not putting a charger in our home? Where do we find public charging, and how does that work, and how efficient is that, and are there going to be enough chargers for all those people getting EVs?
That is a great question, and we're still waiting on infrastructure improvements to have public charging be as ubiquitous as gas stations. I use an app called PlugShare most often to find public DC fast charging when I'm driving an EV. You can sort by charging rate. It will show you available chargers and things like that.
Public fast charging. How fast is fast charging?
That also depends. Fast charging, the standard these days for me is probably, for my personal standard for fast charging, is probably about 150 kilowatts. That's probably good enough for most.
How long does that take?
That will depend.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Roz, I think what you're getting at
I know.
is if you find that 150 kilowatt fast charger and your car is capable of taking that, you can fill up in 20 to 30 minutes,
Okay.
basically from 20 to 80%. And that's really the standard that they're shooting for, is about a 20-minute time frame. There are chargers that will go much faster than that, but there are most of the chargers that are out there are kind of level 2s or level 2 pluses that are under 100, and those are kind of the ones you would want to plug into at work. When you commute into work, you plug into that, your battery gets all the way filled up if you didn't have the charger at home. And that's the scenario that Brian and I'll talk about is today's EV buyers. If you need to count on that public charging network, maybe you want to wait. Maybe you want to wait and buy a plug-in hybrid or regular gas vehicles that's just very efficient. because there are scenarios where you're going to be
Yeah, you're
really
not going to be able
depending on
to
it.
charge it.
And I have a neighbor who's got a EV, and he bought it for his wife, and he's got the home charger level 2. They've had it for a year and a half. She has not visited a gas station since they've owned the vehicle.
Wow.
And what they do is they take their other vehicle when they got to go on longer trips.
Sure.
And so she literally is like, this is the best invention of my life. I never go to the gas station when it's time for, there's no oil changes.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just
right.
literally change tires, change wiper blades, and occasionally there's maintenance issues here and there. But for a lot of people, that's all they're looking for. And they use the other car for daily, the road trip kind of scenario.
Yeah, and if I can really quickly, just to touch on the charging availability. In 2021, the entire state of Illinois had like 2,200 public chargers, DC fast chargers or level 2 chargers. Just in Chicago, Elgin, and Naperville, there are now over 3,000 chargers available, right? So the infrastructure is building out. There are other components that need to be upgraded in order to increase that implementation. But the fact of the matter is that there is push and incentive to make sure that these charging networks are available. You mentioned some of the apps like PlugShare and others that have these posted up on sites where you can actually go to those.
So I know we're running out of time. I want to ask these guys a question and put them on the spot, okay?
Go for it.
So there's been a lot of talk about there's not enough electrons out there to charge all these vehicles. What do you guys say, like, all right, let's say we keep progressing. Right now we're at 10% of the market EVs. Let's say 2-3 years we're at 20%. Can the grid handle it? But what would you guys say?
That's a perfect question, and that's a great question for one of our colleagues and partners, and that's the utility grid system here in Chicago and Illinois, and really the most of Illinois. It's Commonwealth Edison, or ComEd. They're the other player that needs to be at the table when we talk about grid readiness as we make this shift towards the electrification of transportation. But the key is that we have seen growth. We have seen EV chargers put on the network, right, to make sure that people are available to purchase electric vehicles and use that particular amenity. The issue is, of course, always making sure that you are aware of what's going on in the system so you don't injure the system, you don't cause more damage to the system.
And to add something to that, what we have is a renewable energy transition, right? So that transition takes time. It takes time to build that, it takes time to adjust to it, and we're seeing that come along nicely. And I think a big part of it is the consumer education, and this is a great place for them to come to try one of these vehicles, to have discussions with people who might be able to navigate that process with them, because it comes down to it's a big purchase. It's a big purchase, so making sure that you understand where you're at and navigating that can save yourself and your family some money. So we have the Powering Chicago booth right across from the electric vehicle track, so come out and drive one of the vehicles, come by and stop to a contractor, talk to an instructor, talk to someone who has installed and worked on this equipment before.
I have one last question that I wanted to bring up, and it has to do with these batteries. How long do the batteries in these EVs last?
Well, I know one thing, they're warranted to last for 8 years or 100,000 miles, I believe. So that's a guarantee. But you guys can talk a little bit about more of the longevity, maybe.
That's a great question, and that's not our particular wheelhouse. We don't manufacture or maintain any of the vehicles. We're more electricians installing the infrastructure. However, I would suggest that if anyone's looking at investing in this equipment, ask those questions of your dealer, right, to make sure that you're getting the most and you understand what demand is going to be on that battery for the long term, what kind of warranties that you have and that are afforded to you when you purchase that vehicle.
The one thing that I love about the show is the fact that not only can people do test ride, they can ride in these EVs, but the test drive. A lot of these manufacturers have electric vehicles that people can go out around McCormick Place and drive. So it gives you an opportunity to actually see what it feels like to drive one of these. And I strongly recommend, if you're in the market for an EV, that you do that. It took me several years just to dip my toe in the waters to get a hybrid, but I'm ready to take the next step after this car, and I'm really happy with it. You talk about saving money. I'm filling up every other week instead of every week, and that's just with a hybrid. So yeah, but again, my mantra is knowledge is power. So learn, 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 ask questions. People here are very available to help you. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. You know, this is one of my favorite
Thanks, Ralph.
topics. I
Thank
love
you.
it. We'll see you tomorrow with a brand new panel.